There's a concept in Dark Souls called hollowing. It's what happens to an undead when they lose all purpose and all hope. They forget their goal, they forget who they are, they just become empty. A shell wandering aimlessly, hostile to everything. And to be honest with you, there have been moments and months during this game dev journey where I've felt like I've gone hollow myself. Not literally, of course, but the existential kind, where the big ambitious dream of my game starts to feel a little stupid. Whether it be the bugs or the setbacks or the pressures of life, they just pile up and it feels like my goal might disappear. In those moments, I sometimes feel like I'm going through the motions, like I'm a hollow shell of what I want to be. Despite all that, I want to tell you how Dark Souls teaches you a cure for this hollowing. It's not some magical item, it's a choice. It's a choice to kindle a bonfire and to reclaim your purpose. Now, follow me with this analogy, please. That choice, that fight against the hollowing of your ambition is what I want to talk to you about today. What if failure isn't what makes us go hollow? What if it's the very thing that gives our success meaning? So to understand this cure, we need to understand how to kindle our own bonfires. We need to look at one of the greatest examples of design failure, and that is Dark Souls. Because it's not just about dying a lot. It's about a very specific, almost philosophical system built around three core principles. First, we'll look at the lesson. How Dark Souls uses failure not as a punishment, but as a teacher. Then, the stakes. How the threat of failure at any moment makes every decision matter. And finally, the cycle. This is the big one. How the entire game is built on a loop of trying, failing, learning, and growing. A loop that is identical to the process of building something from nothing. Let's talk about the lesson. In Dark Souls, failure is the teacher. But what they don't always tell you is that the teacher can be brutally and unfairly harsh. On my first playthrough of Dark Souls, I did something not too smart. I completely missed the path to the Undead Burg, the place where you're supposed to go. Instead, I went to the catacombs and then later into the Tomb of the Giants. I was level 10 fighting skeletons that resurrected in the dark, falling off ledges, and I just kept dying and dying and dying for hours. It was miserable. It was the bad kind of frustration. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I was like, this game is impossible. I'm not good enough for this. But eventually I clawed my way out of it, and I made it back to Firelink Shrine battered and bruised. And then I found the real path, the one to the Undead Burg, the correct path. And something incredible happened. Those low-level hollows felt like they were moving in slow motion because I was so over-leveled at that point. After surviving the nightmare of the Tomb of the Giants, I had a level of patience and skill that I didn't have before. I had gone through one of the most difficult challenges the game had to offer, and I made it out the other side. Now, the intended path felt a little bit easier than it was supposed to. The bad failure, that time I spent going through that unnecessary difficulty, had paradoxically made me stronger. And this is where it connects to game dev. When I started, I was following tutorials. I was on the right path. I would do what they told me to do, and everything was great until it wasn't. I copied the code exactly, and it works in the tutorial, but on my end, it doesn't work. I get an error that the tutorial doesn't. Or something else would happen, like the animations wouldn't sync perfectly. This was what I call the bad kind of frustration. It wasn't the satisfying, oh, I need to learn the boss's pattern sort of frustration. It was more of the Tomb of the Giants frustration, where I'm in the dark and any moment I will just fall off a ledge and go back to the beginning. The feeling like the system was broken, that I was missing something that other people might have, was very demotivating. But here's the revelation. Just like my disastrous detour in Dark Souls, these bad failures were in fact trying to teach me something. They forced me to move beyond just copying and pasting. They forced me to read the error messages, to Google what these messages could mean, and to try to figure it out on my own. And instead of just following the tutorial now, I was trying to understand why the character moves, what every single line of code does. Now I was learning the underlying system. That bad frustration led to real and fundamental understanding. It was the Tomb of the Giants for my coding skills. So the lesson is failure is the teacher, but it has two classrooms. There's the direct lesson, dodge this way to beat the boss. And then there's the brutal indirect lesson. Survive the overwhelming odds, and for every challenge that you push past, it's more likely to lead to your success. In Dark Souls, that's getting lost, but in game dev, that's when following the tutorial no longer works. Both kinds will help you, but I think the brutal one is the one that'll lead to more growth in the long run. Knowing the lesson is one thing, committing to it is something completely different. And that commitment requires something else, a tangible fear of loss. And that brings us to our second principle, the stakes. In the first part, we talked about failure as a teacher, but a lesson only matters if you care about the consequences. In Dark Souls, the genius is the stakes. When you die, you drop all of your souls and the game transforms into something else. It's no longer about learning, it's about risk. The run back to your bloodstain is one of the most heart-pounding moments of the game. Every enemy is a threat, every ledge seems scarier than usual. Because at this point, you're not just fighting to progress, you're fighting to reclaim what you have already earned. And this is where the metaphor starts to get uncomfortably real. Because in game development, you also have a run back after failure. But it's not through a castle full of enemies, it's a mental run. For me, it looks like this. I had a long day at work. All I really want to do is maybe take a nap, see my friends, or just watch TV. But I have this goal, this project. So I make the choice. I open up Unity, I stare at my code, and I try to get back to my bloodstain. I try to reclaim the motivation and the progress that I've lost. You're fighting your own fatigue, your own desire to do something easier. You're not just solving a problem, you're fighting to reclaim that belief in the project itself. Because with every failure, you're scared of losing motivation. In Dark Souls, the worst case scenario is losing your souls forever. In game dev, the worst case scenario is losing the vision. We all have it, that perfect legendary game in our heads. The sound, the feeling, the moments that would just blow people away. It's flawless, it's everything. And the biggest fear, the thing that gets to me, is the gap between that perfect game I imagine and the clumsy and imperfect thing that I am creating. The fear that my hands and my skills are never going to be good enough to bridge that gap between the two. That no matter how hard I try, I could never actually create that legendary game that I have imagined in my head. This is our equivalent to watching our souls vanish. It's the quiet, hallowing thought of, what if I'm just not capable? What if my dream is too big? This can be demoralizing. It's not just about losing progress on a task. It's about the potential of the death of the dream itself. So the stakes in the Dark Souls games are a very clever mechanic. But the stakes in game dev are existential. They are a battle for your motivation, your time, and for your creative vision. This is why the cycle of failure in game dev or anything you do in the real world hurts so much than in the game. But, and this is a crucial but, Dark Souls gives us something to face these stakes. It's not about avoiding the risk, it's about transforming the relationship you have with risk. And that brings us to our final and most important principle, the cycle. This is the bonfire. It's more than a checkpoint. In the cycle of try, fail, die, the bonfire is a sanctuary. It's where you process the lesson, heal from the damage, and solidify your growth. It's the calm in the storm. And in game development, I've learned to recognize my own bonfires. It can be the moment after I fix a bug. Or it can be when I add a new element to the game and it just works. No errors in the dashboard, no game-breaking glitches. The moment where the vision in my head takes one clean step into what I want to truly create. That's my bonfire. It's the warmth that heals my frustration and refills my motivation. It's proof that progress is possible. But sometimes a regular bonfire is not enough, you need a stronger flame. Follow me with this analogy. In Dark Souls, you can kindle it. You sacrifice a rare resource to make that sanctuary permanently stronger. It's a proactive investment in your own resilience. And I've learned what it means to kindle my own flame, even though that sounds a little silly. It doesn't come from following a tutorial perfectly or generating some AI code. It's the opposite. It's when I see an error and I can make a correction based on my own understanding. That's kindling the flame. It's a skill I've earned through my failures to make my understanding and my confidence stronger. The entire cycle, the failure, the high stakes, the desperate run to the bonfire, the act of kindling it all comes back to this question. What is this all for? And here I'm not just talking about game dev, I'm talking about anything in life. At one point in my life, it was for money, fame, and recognition. But all of these are external factors, and it kind of made me miserable. I was studying finance, and that is a great thing to study if you want to make money, but also the work itself is not rewarding even in the slightest. It was making me miserable. But this journey of game dev, it burned that hollow goal away. If my goal is to get rich, making a game by myself is one of the worst ways to possibly do it. The odds are astronomically against me. But this goal, seemingly unprofitable, masochistic even, is the happiest I've ever been in my life. The meaning isn't in the potential payout at the end or even the success of it at the end. The meaning is in the cycle of itself, the struggle. It's in every small bonfire moment of creation and every time I kindle the flame with my own skills. The game I'm building might not be legendary, but the person I'm becoming in the process, the problem solver, the resilient creator, the one who finds joy in the try rather than the outcome, that feels like its own kind of legend. Dark Souls taught me that the only true failure is to go hollow, to give up on your purpose. And my purpose is no longer to make a profitable product, my purpose is to create. To see this through, to embrace the cycle of failure, not as a roadblock, but as the very path itself. So if you take one thing away from this, let it be this. Whether it be an impossible boss in the game or an impossible moment in your life, the cycle is the same. You will fail and the stakes will be terrifyingly high. But if you learn to recognize your bonfires and to kindle them, the struggle becomes the point itself. The meaning is in the trying. This is existential game dev. I'm figuring it out as I go. If you're on a similar path, whether it be making a game, writing a book, or trying to get that job you always wanted, let me know in the comments. Tell me about your last bonfire moment. And if you want to follow along as I struggle not to go hollow, consider subscribing. Thank you for watching.